Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik, we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host a Clubhouse every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and this week, along with Rabbi Mintz, we explore the origins of ritual slaughter, the implicit bias of the Torah to vegetarianism, and the origins and limitations of carnivorism in Judaism. We also highlight the contribution of Judaism to mindfulness when it comes to our supply chain and where we go from here. So throw another eggplant on the Barbie and join us for Kashrut, Yashrut, and the flesh of desire. So welcome to Madlik, Disruptive Torah, and this week is Parshart Re'eh. And in two little verses, it pretty much makes the only biblical reference, and maybe not even a reference, but a kind of an allusion to laws that practicing Jews take very, very seriously, and that is the laws of Kashrut, of slaughtering animals. And I must say that when I first stumbled upon this, I was amazed by how little is there. So let's jump right into it. It's Deuteronomy 12, and it says, "When the Lord enlarges your territory, as he has promised you, and you say, 'I shall eat some meat,' for you have the urge to eat meat, you may eat meat whenever you wish. If the place where the Lord has chosen to establish his name is too far from you, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that the Lord gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements." So clearly, this was written at a point where if you take it into the context that it's the voice it's supposed to be written in, which is when the Jews were first coming into the land, and they were already understanding that they were going to enlarge. They already somehow had an intuition that there was going to be a centralized temple, and that's what the reference is to the place where the Lord has chosen to establish his name. But what is assumed here is that, number one, you can only eat meat in that chosen place at the temple. And as many of you know from the Passover sacrifice, that was a sacrifice that's sacrificed to God, but eaten by a group of people. So eating of meat, one can assume there was a time where you could only eat it around the temple. And here is the permission to eat it if you're too far away to eat it in the temple. And it doesn't give any rules for slaughtering it. It just says an allusion, "as I have instructed you," Kasher Tziviticha. So I'm going to stop now before we dive into the many nuances of this. But Rabbi, what do these two sentences mean to you?
Well, the first thing is very important, again, that meat was only eaten as part of the sacrifices. Meat was considered to be a tremendous luxury, and it was only eaten, you couldn't eat it just for yourself. It had to be part of religious experience. That's a huge transition from eating meat as part of the sacrifice to eating meat for dinner and having a hamburger, having a barbecue at home. That might have been the biggest transition that the Jews experienced when they entered the land.
I think you're correct. Both when they entered the land and possibly when they first entered the land with a traveling tabernacle, and before the temple was built, this also, and I kind of alluded to, we don't know exactly when this was written.
That's right.
You know, when there was a tabernacle in Shiloh, and there were other places that had these tabernacles, the religion was more distributed. But when it became centralized in Jerusalem at the temple, that was also a moment, just like coming into the promised land was a moment. And so So what we're seeing is, as if we didn't know, that the practice of Judaism evolved, clearly evolved, whether from the days of the desert into the promised land or from the days when it was a decentralized tribal conglomerate to when it becomes centralized in Jerusalem. But I want to focus for a second on a word used. The English is, if you desire, you may eat meat when you have the urge to eat meat. In the Hebrew, it's ochla basar ki te'ava nafshecha. You can eat, if you desire to eat meat, because your soul craves for it. The word ta'ava it carries baggage, I believe. In Hebrew, if you called somebody a Baal Ta'ava, it's a glutton, pretty much. It's someone who's driven by their desires. Even in the Bible itself, in the desert, when there was the riffraff or the Erev Rav, and they were complaining, it says in Numbers, v'te'avu ta'ava, they had this gluttonous craving. And when they were punished and killed for their craving, the name of the place that they were buried was Kivrot HaTa'ava, was the
That's
place...
very good, right.
Of the gluttony. So I think that I wonder, and I ask you, Rabbi, do we, when we read this, is there that sense of social criticism, and is this sort of a concession, or am I just taking this out of context?
No, you are definitely not. I would just tweak what you said, Geoffrey, to say, I think the Torah doesn't say that every time you eat meat that it's bad, that it's gluttony. I think the Torah is concerned that it has the potential to become gluttony. You have to be very careful. Originally, the way the Torah was careful said that you only are allowed to eat meat if part of that meat is going as a religious sacrifice. So therefore, you're not going to be irresponsible if it's going as a religious sacrifice. So I think being a Baal Ta'ava is connected to meat, and therefore they needed to restrict and to limit the ways in which you were allowed to eat meat.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention another important one in the Ten Commandments. Right after it says, do not covet your neighbor's wife, it says, you shall not crave your neighbor's house. Lo te'ava beit re'echa. So it definitely has this sense, and it does carry some social baggage in terms of calling... And again, I hear what you said, but I have to say also that what we have is a juxtaposition here of meat that is sanctified and sacrificed in the temple, and meat that is basar teva. And it could mean meat outside of the temple, that any meat outside of the temple is basar teva. Or I think what you're saying, which is interesting, is that when you do eat meat outside of the temple, you have to make sure that there is a religious, a spiritual element to it.
That is what I'm saying, because that will protect you against the ta'ava issue.
So I think, this is an interesting type of, we're going to get into maybe the history of eating meat and the approach of the Bible to eating meat in a second. But before we do, it is a good case study in how the Bible, the Torah, deals with the less than perfect characteristics that we people have. In other words, it understands that people have these desires, and we don't live in a black and white world. And I think this becomes then kind of an interesting case study. So before we dive into the development of eating meat, let's also use this as an opportunity to understand where the laws that we have of shchita came from. So Rashi focuses on this verse, And the fact that in verse 21, God says, you may slaughter the sheep and the cattle that the Lord gives you as I have instructed you. Kasher Tziviticha. And Rashi says that from here we learn that there must be an oral tradition, because if you read the 5 books of Moses backwards and forwards, you will never find any of these laws there. You know, there's a joke that I once heard that says that in Rome they found some copper strings a foot down in an excavation, and they said this proves that the early Romans must have had a phone system, and the Greeks didn't want to be outdone, and they dug down 2 feet and they found some threads made of glass, and they said, well, we must have had a fiber optic system in our day. And then the Israelis didn't want to be outdone, and they dug down 4 feet and they found nothing, and they said, well, we must have had a cellular network. So this is a situation where we have nothing in the written law about the laws of Shechita, and the laws of Shechita are very extensive. And Rashi wants to bring from here a proof. He doesn't simply say that, well, those are commanded in the oral law. He says from here, the fact that it was referenced, an oral law or a commandment was referenced, we know that the oral law exists. So that is kind of an interesting maneuver, but it does speak to how much of the regular practice of Judaism is contained in the oral law.
Yeah, well, the interrelationship between the oral law and the written law is an amazing topic, isn't it?
It certainly is, and for those who study the Talmud, they know that there are so many diverse opinions that sometimes you can go back and find an opinion that was not a mainstream opinion, but it certainly means that nothing is written in stone, but that in fact these laws that are so critical to the lifestyle of so many Jews are not contained in the written law. And it's always important that you know your sources, so that you know that something is based on Torah in terms of the written Torah, and some things are based on the oral tradition. And you got to give credit.
Up, Geoffrey, an interesting point now, and that is to know the difference about whether it's biblical or whether it's rabbinic. And that somehow if it's biblical, it's more important. I'm going to tell you a little secret. The rabbis often tell us that the rabbinic law is more important, because they were afraid that people would be lax on the rabbinic law. So they try to make an extra effort to make a big point about the rabbinic law, which is obviously it's self-serving, but it's interesting.
Absolutely. And in this case, you've got to give them credit for acknowledging that it's in the oral law. And I think that's something that I was also found important. They might emphasize the importance of the law, but they also emphasize full transparency. Noi, welcome to the platform. I'd love to hear from you.
Hi. I just have a question. Are you Orthodox Jews?
This is a wonderful discussion, because this is not Orthodox, conservative, or reform. We're just studying the text. Everybody is equal in this conversation.
Yeah, but I wanted to know. Yeah, okay. Just wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, we're all equal in this conversation. We don't make distinctions.
Yeah. And I think that in general, when it comes to studying the texts, it really, it's not important who you are or what you believe, but that you're studying.
Of course. We all believe in God.
You got it.
Hashem.
Yep. Michael, welcome to the platform.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. I have a question. It's as if we say we're, chosen, and we were given this information hundreds of years ago that eating meat has to be in midah, in some sort of balance, and not gluttony, as you said. And so now we're discovering on documentary movies like, I don't remember the names, about how the meat farming, meat raising industry is causing, I think, 50% of the issues with the carbon monoxide. I just know it is one of the largest factors in climate warming. And I'd like to ask you guys, if we were given this information that meat and eating and raising of meat for eating and not for some maybe religious sacrificial purpose, which sounds good to me now compared to the eating industry of meat, that we would not have climate change challenges, and what role we as Israelites and Jews have in bringing this wisdom and knowledge to humanity as the chosen people who could say, hey guys, it's been told thousands of years ago, or whenever the Torah and all this information was passed down. So if somebody could address this, that would be great.
So I think that you're absolutely correct. And before we go into the history of vegetarianism, because I think you're going to see that the bias of the Torah is very much towards vegetarianism. But before we leave these verses, I think one of the things that's so exciting to me about this discussion, and I alluded to it before by saying it's not black and white, that there are degrees, and that one of the rabbis said about this verse that it says, when you expand your territory, he said the Torah taught that it is a desired behavior of a person should consume meat due only to appetite, meaning to say you should never eat meat pell-mell as just, I have meat and potatoes every lunch. That's the way I'm built. That's the way we are. You should save it for special situations where you have a craving, and that craving could be psychologically based. It could be nutritional based. But I think what you were saying, Michael, in terms of in midah, in context and in exerting a certain self-discipline. And I think that's the flip side of gluttony is not abstention. The flip side of gluttony is to do things using moderation. And I do believe that it's a striking example. I don't know how many other examples in the Torah there are that it says outright, many times in the Torah, it's either asur, it's forbidden, or patur, it's permitted. But how many times does it say it's good in moderation? And I think we are seeing something here, and the environmental issues that you raise are critical, meaning to say that there are certain things that we really have to moderate, and we have to do them thoughtfully.
So that's great, but why haven't we used our brilliance and our influence? We're great influencers. We take it out of the study room and say, wait, this is a mission. I mean, to show, to say, wait, this is proving that it's self-sabotaging humanity. This planet could explode in 50 years, and all this talk about if we are the people that God spoke to, we have a responsibility, and not to be worried about fighting for a land, or maybe let's fight for the land and fight for the planet. I don't understand how we don't take it out of the discussion room and say, planet, God has spoken to us.
So, Michael, I just want to say, your question is better than my answer, but I want to tell you that the yeshiva in Riverdale, Chovevei Torah, at the end of July, just last month, a couple of weeks ago, they had an entire day that was dedicated to climate control. And they dealt with these issues. And there were many people at that conference who believed, Michael, exactly what you said, is we need to take it out of the study hall, and we need to teach the world about what the Torah's laws are and how the Torah wants to protect the environment and what we need to protect the environment. So I wouldn't say that it's mainstream, Michael, but there's no question that the issues that you raise are issues that are being raised now in the Jewish community, and things that people are talking about.
That's great to know. Thank you, Rabbi.
And I think part and parcel of that is that that Judaism gave the world something which I think is amazing, and that is thoughtfulness, eating thoughtfully, and that is a gift that we've given. But I think what is happening in the last 100 years at least, and it's accelerating every week, is that society is passing Judaism by, because Judaism spent a lot of time looking at, if you want to look at shechita, ritual slaughter, as looking at the food chain. That has become much more important. If Judaism has used the laws of Kashrut to talk about the quality and the qualifications of people involved with the slaughter of animals, again, modern society is starting to look at ethical issues. Do you pay your employees at the slaughterhouse properly? Do they have health benefits? Do we, when we buy food, we are more interested now than ever, not only in the nutritional value, but on the whole supply chain. And I think, sometimes being the early creator of something, the first mover, is an advantage, but sometimes you get overcome with your own achievements. And I think that now, and we're seeing movements along this, there's a movement that talks not about kashrut, but about Yashrut. Yashrut means being, yashar is straight, being justified, just person. And this is an organization that will say, maybe the meat is slaughtered in a humane way, but you also have to make sure that the workers are paid. And if it's not kosher meat. I think that is the real challenge. It might start at the study hall, but it means opening up the parameters of the discussion. Mike, welcome to our platform. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was thinking about what you said, and real quickly, my background is I grew up in a very moderate Chabad Lubavitch family. I'm not Chabad anymore, but growing up, seeing my family, the way they do things when it comes to kashrut, they'll pay attention to all these details about, okay, we have this, it has a K on the box, we'll buy this meat, but they won't think about the fact that this meat has all these hormones injected into it and all these other things that make the meat just terrible products, whether it's meat or processed food. It seems that I'm not just picking on Orthodox, but I'm picking on anyone. It just seems that we as a people have got our values just totally misplaced. That's what all I wanted to say for now.
Okay, thanks, Mike, for your comment. That's, Michael had brought that up, and we appreciate that, and we understand that maybe the Jewish community has a responsibility. And I think, to Geoffrey's credit, the choice of, this idea of kashrut and yashrut, this is only one piece of kashrut and yashrut. But, this conversation that we're having today, and it's recorded and everything, and we have a whole bunch of people who are listening, maybe this is going to, make this a point of conversation, which will allow other people to, to join and to understand some of these issues. I think we have Ethan on the line. Joe, would you like to join the conversation?
Sure. So I'll try to keep this brief so we can keep the conversation moving. When we were talking about the opposite of gluttony, not being abstention but moderation, I guess my question is, does that tie back to when we were discussing in previous weeks? The term is escaping me now. when
A
you
Nazarite? Was it Nazarite?
Yes, exactly. Yes, when you're going to be a Nazir, thank you. You have to bring a korban chatat at the end of the period of Nazirut, and while there are different explanations, one of the explanations for why you bring a korban chatat, is that you decided to entirely abstain from partaking of wine, and you forbade yourself some of what is available to enjoy in the world.
I think it's definitely related, and I was thinking of that as well. Moderation is I think they used to attribute it to Maimonides, the golden rule, so to speak. Not too far to the right, not too far to the left, but moderation. And I do believe that in this particular law, we can call it a concession. We can call it the crooked root of humanity. But yes, we do have desires, and those any form of law or religion that doesn't take into account those desires, I think, ultimately rings false. And so you have whether it's the ability for someone to become a Nazir if they have an issue with some substances, or whether it's someone to end their abstention. These are all beautiful things that are written into the Torah law that has become a part of culture, I think. And we can be proud of it, but I think we also have to understand that these should empower us to go further. And that's, I think, what's so fascinating about the discussion that we're having in the question of how we can go farther. So I want to just move forward a little bit and talk about the history of meat eating in the Torah. And the truth is that in Genesis, when the world is created, it does not give man permission to eat meat, to take the soul from an animal. In fact, it says, all of the fruits and the plants that I give you shall be for you for a food. It's only at the time of Noah that when Noah took those animals 2 by 2 into the ark, that in a sense Noah was given sort of rights because he had saved the world that he could then eat. So in Genesis 9, it says, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses. So it's referring back to the earlier part of Genesis where all he could eat was the green grasses. Now you can eat animal. And that's why even by Jewish law, we have 613 commandments, but Jewish tradition believes that people who descended from Noah, which is pretty much everybody has been descended from Noah because he was the only survivor of the flood, they cannot eat a limb from a live animal. It's called Aver min hachai. So this was the first dietary constraint associated with being carnivorous, eating meat. And I'd like to wonder what everybody else's takeaway in terms of Noah's loophole, so to speak, for eating meat. I should say that nature kind of changed after the flood. Maybe people didn't live as long anymore. So it's kind of a recognition in the Bible of a new epoch, a new transition, and maybe meat was necessary at that point. But certainly it's two sides in my mind, because on the one hand, Noah saved all the animals and therefore has certain rights. But I believe once you save somebody, you also have obligations. And I think that that's where these laws of supply chain and sources of our foods and how we harvest our foods come into play. What are your thoughts on that?
So thank you very much, Geoffrey. The idea that Noah is given permission to eat meat is very much connected to the question of authority. Before the flood, man wasn't in control. And that's what led, at least the way God understood it, to complete anarchy. After the flood, there's a more organized system. And the organized system is that man controls animals. And in a sense, the Torah tells us at the end of chapter 2 that Adam couldn't find a mate. And if you read the Torah carefully, it sounds like Adam went on a date with every single animal. And he couldn't, he didn't find a good mate. And therefore, God took a woman from his side. But it seems like the relationship between animals and humans was one of equal. After the flood, God realized that was a bad way to be. And therefore, he gave people dominion over animals.
And I would just add that with dominion comes responsibility. And that we are, and that's why I never understand why evangelical Christians and fundamentalist Christians don't take environmentalism more seriously, because it's so natural for someone who believes in the Genesis story, who believes that God created the world and made us the guardian of the world, that we have to take that guardianship so seriously. So I think the takeaway from today's discussion of these verses is, at the most basic level, we have to be thoughtful about what we eat, and where our supply chain is. And I also believe that when Jesus talked about the laws of Kashrut, he said something that could have been in the Talmud. He says it's more important what comes out of your mouth than what goes into it. But I think what he was saying was very similar to the discussion that we're having, and that is that these rules, and this goes to Mike's point, should never be about reading labels only, and should never be about crossing T's and dotting I's. That would sell it so short. It's about our evolution. It's about our growth. It's about our ability to become better guardians of ourselves and of the world, and to not only take into account the fact that we have certain desires and to master those desires, but I think also to use those desires in a good way. It's such a powerful a weapon that we have. We wake up in the morning with a bounce in our step because we desire to do something, and we have to harness that power and the food that we eat in a way that's sanctified. And I think that if you do look at Judaism, while I am surprised that vegetarianism isn't more widespread given the history of it. Why great scholars and great pietists and religious leaders don't focus on vegetarian more. But what we do have is that the time to eat meat is in a sanctified moment. On Shabbat, for instance, there are Zemirot that talk about on Shabbat we have meat. There were people who were vegetarian by situation, not by desire, who were poor, but on Shabbat they would have that basar tava, that meat of desire. So I think all of that says there's so much for us to learn about the laws of Kashrut in their larger sense. And I wish us all a Shabbat Shalom of fulfilling any ta'ivah that we have and harnessing it in a good direction.
Amen. Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Look forward to next week.
You got it. Shabbat Shalom. Hey, it's Geoffrey. Don't go yet. Before we move to a new segment of our podcast, which is the after party, I just want to remind all you listeners who listen to this as a podcast to go ahead and give us a few stars and write a nice comment. The more people that hear about us, the more people will be inspired. So now, for the first time, we bring you this week the after party, where one of our longtime listeners, Ethan, and I have a little discussion that goes in another direction with regard to the future of Kashrut. So if you have the patience, go ahead and give a listen. Ethan, thanks for joining as well.
Shalom. Are you up to taking yet one more question?
Of course.
Okay, this is prompted by your very last comment, and so I guess now that you're talking about environmentalism, and we're now really on about to have a breakthrough on creating lab meats. At least I guess I'll preface this by saying I'm an idiot savant, and at least from what I've read, it sounds like in order to have kosher lab meat, the original source needs to be from an animal that's been shechted. It couldn't come 100% from a lab, or it can't. If you were to take something from a live animal, it'd be treated as aver min hachai, and it seems inconsistent with our wish to preserve life, especially if we could reduce our need to shecht, which I think is going to become a reality sooner than we all expect. But I guess my question is, am I correct about this? And if I am correct, am I missing something?
Well, I must say that when I was thinking about this subject, it did dawn on me the same issue that you're discussing, which is, can we now envision a world where all of our quote-unquote meat is not really meat according to the halachic definition, that it provides the same protein or whatever, but it was formulated using other methods. It might not come from a live animal. And what does that do to kashrut? There's so much, and this is really a subject for another discussion, but there's so much about kashrut that we Jews find identifies us. It's not something that we do in order to be ethical and all that, but it's so part of our identity. And again, in today's discussion, it doesn't say, and you have to follow the commandments that I made to kill your animals in a distinctive manner. That's not the issue. So what happens in a world where there is no kashrut anymore because there's no meat anymore? And what does this do to even the vision of that in 50 years or 20 years? How does that reflect on how the place that we've put kashrut into our lives as Jews? It's become so identifying, and it can be, also exclusionary. It can be a way that keeps us away from people. And so I just think that's a fascinating thought experiment. In terms of what are we doing wrong with kashrut that's making it into something that identifies us, where if we became vegetarians, we could eat in every vegetarian restaurant out there. The levels of hechsher, if you will, of making sure that when you say something is vegetarian, that it is vegetarian, or up to speed, we could be a world eating the same things. And how would that help to open us up as Jews, or what would we lose as Jews if we didn't have kashrut? I think that's a fascinating thought experiment.
No, I the only thing you said that I disagree with is 20 or 50 years. I think it's actually coming much sooner than that. But
I think you're right. Okay, well, that's something for all of us to think about. Anyway, Ethan, great for having you. Hope to see you next week, and Shabbat Shalom to everybody.